Hello, and welcome to Brahm Show. And also,
the Just a Thinker podcast.
This is Brahm French, and we've got
Bryan Bootka.
And we're doing a simultaneous duo podcast just for you, our listeners.
We're trying to up my listenership and reduce Brahms.
That won't take much. I don't know how you can reduce for one.
You know what? My mom might subscribe to your podcast as well. We each will have one.
We will double.
Yes, we'll each have one good listener, consecutive subscriber who listens to the podcast.
Sister Carol, it's great to have you with us.
That's right. Mom will be out there listening and sharing with her friends.
I wish I could get my mom to listen.
No, I should ask this. I know your father has passed away.
Yes.
But has your mom?
No, she is still
okay. So I was going to be careful on making any jokes that get me in trouble. Like now I would have no listeners, and the Lord would be coming down on me for bad jokes. So I'll be able to make better jokes next time. But I do want to be somewhat sensitive to my friends.
For me, I'm very hard to offend.
We'd be testing that today.
Yeah,
we would test that today.
Yeah.
So topics.
So let's talk about the Christian experience in America in 2024, right? How do we navigate through a world, right? Because we are just pilgrims passing through. This isn't our home. How do we navigate through this and still hold to Christian principles, Christian values, and continue to make a difference? I think that's part of the reason our nation, America, is in the place that it is in, is because to some extent our pulpits have gone silent, and we haven't addressed topics, issues. We've just kind of coddled everybody. We don't want to dare offend people,
right? So
we don't preach things that are clearly defined in the Word. And I can't help but see how our culture has taken a twist and gone sideways with that. And so what I would like to talk about for a little bit is how can we as Christians come back and refocus our energy and our effort into impacting our society.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's going to be the bulk of what I focus on in the various podcasts that we do. Just a Thinker is how are we living that out, right? Because I think if you ask most of us, if I ask you or if you ask me even 10 years ago, Bryan, are you an American? Are you a Christian? Which are you, right? Where's your national identity? I would say a Christian. But if you spent time talking to me and were asking about how I approach a particular thing, it probably would seem I was much more, especially 10 years ago, far more identifying with a political party, maybe the Republican Party, than even being a Christian. I would have confused church and state. I would have not, if you matched it up as Chad might do against the Sermon on the Mount or some of the other teachings of Jesus, it would have been out of alignment. And I couldn't give credit to the particular podcast, but a person recently was talking about how Christians in America should maybe see ourselves as exiles in Babylon. Like some of those folks, the believers at that time were sometimes get elevated into the political system, but they weren't running for office. I'm not saying people shouldn't, but they were exiles, right?
Yeah,
they were captive. And much like the believers in Jesus' time, right? Rome controlled Israel, so they didn't get to vote. We do, right? But often my views would have been out of alignment, right? Like I tell you I'm a Christian, but if you sit down and talk to me, I might want to punish people for things that I shouldn't or, didn't have the right attitude towards.
Yeah. You're talking about like the political, doesn't matter if you're left or right. Some of that you touched on something I think it's pretty interesting, because when America was founded, when the United States was founded, we're going against Britain, right? We're going against England. And in that contrast, there was no left or right.
Correct.
There was, hey, let's be free.
Right.
Let's embrace liberty. And I think to some extent, if we just went back to those same principles as Christians, we could make a huge impact and inroads in our culture.
Yes. And right, people came to the New World to have first religious freedom. Yes, there was Columbus. There were folks looking for riches. But God put it in man to explore. Proverbs, forgive me for not knowing the chapter and verse, but in Proverbs it says that the glory of a king to hide a thing, and it's the glory of a king to discover it, right? So probably poorly paraphrasing that, but to me that's like the Lord has put things out there in this earth and into our hearts to look and explore. So there's the natural part of that, people looking for new land, wealth, that's part of human nature, looking for some reward. But the bulk of people ended up coming because of religious freedom, right? They could worship the way they wanted. And then, yes, the founding of the country were mostly believers, right? There were people who weren't. And there's all kinds of interesting literature on whether the founders were all deists or Christians. But most of them were believers in some form or fashion. You're right. Society tended to mimic our personal values as Christians far more than today. And even then, there were fewer laws, but there are more now where it seems like we're trying to legislate our morality versus I am salt and light in a dark world, right? And we're making it all salt or all light. And we're forgetting that I have to be very thoughtful, I should say, about wanting to impose what I think is a law that God wants for us to obey when we're a Christian, and even things that are good for us that may not need to be enforced with a gun, right? Because all the laws at the end of the day, if I don't pay my property taxes, or if I violated some law, at the end of the day, someone knocks on that door and they come with a gun. Now, they don't come to shoot me. Okay, I won't exaggerate. But if I resist arrest, if I haven't paid the property taxes, they do forcibly remove me from the house. If I have committed some other crime, or even not a crime, but broken a law, an ordinance, someone comes with a badge and a gun. I have to be careful that I don't start applying, putting that coercive power into place, at least I think so, to then make sure my neighbor is not unkind to the other person, right? But we're getting close to those kind of things, and we can go extreme in various ways.
Absolutely. So that's something else that's really interesting. Talking about the laws that are in place. Back in the garden, there was only one law. Right. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That was the only sole law. After the garden, right? When we get to Moses, there are 10 laws. Then you go a little further, and it's 613 laws. Right. The further we've gone away from God, the more laws we've had to put in place, or we have at least felt like we've had to put in place. And now we're getting to the position, at least in America, where we've got not just extra biblical, but anti-biblical laws that are being imposed on people.
I think when it comes to laws, as Christians, regardless of denomination, we should know more than anyone that laws don't change hearts. They convict us after the fact, right? Some will argue, Brian, if we have strong laws, that it will prevent crime. Well, no, it won't. You could kill the person who committed the crime, and that particular perpetrator will no longer do it. But we know that having a strong police force is not the primary indicator for keeping an area safe and peaceful. We know, statistically speaking, that the number one way to predict whether someone's going to be a criminal in the future or not, and along with not only their criminal behavior, but their level of education, their level of health, their level of whether they're in poverty or not, it's really simple. Is there a father in the home?
Yes.
Number one.
Yes.
Number one predictor.
Absolutely.
Will that young man grow up, and it's usually men, will that young man grow up and be a criminal? Will he be well-educated or poorly educated? We happen to be in Round Rock today, not is the Round Rock police force militarized. And are they stormtroopers? Is everybody fearful of the Round Rock PD? That is not the key indicator. It's is dad involved?
Oh, so true.
So we can't, yes, you have to have some laws, right? We have to, but it's always been wrong to steal, right? even if it was not against the law, so to speak, that would never be the case. We would intuitively know it is wrong. Little kids know when the toddler in their play group takes a toy that doesn't belong to them, right? I take a toy from you. If we were 4, you would instinctively reach out and say, no, that's mine. Mm-hmm. Not just because you're selfish, because it's yours. You would intuitively know that's wrong. So yes, we need some laws, but we'll have laws that we've imposed. I mean, talk about the extra biblical ones. A good one is one that's already, been handled, I say, is marriage, right? We have marriage and abortion. As a Christian, I know that marriage was ordained by God, a man and a woman. Most of us know this. In our society, we have marriage laws that overlap the laws of the church. Now, there are legal reasons legal benefits to being married, right? Ease with taxes and all kinds of things. If my wife is sick, I can go to the hospital. If the kids are sick, I get access. So there are, back up, as a father, I get access to my kids, but with my spouse, if we're married, I have all kinds of access. If I died, after our podcast, if I go for a drive and I die in a car wreck, my wife doesn't have to fight for our assets. They automatically transfer to her. So there are some contractual benefits. But as a society, we've managed marriage. We've told people, not only do you have to have the permission of the spouse to marry them, you have to have the permission of the state. Right. Now, historically, we did this so black men couldn't marry white women. By and large, that's why we did it. Now, to me, that's crazy because we're growing up, you and I have grown up in a time where that was far more common. But our parents' generation and before them, that was the purpose of these laws. So let's be honest about that. And so today we have same-sex marriage. Christians get upset.
Right.
But here's the challenge. We confuse legal with moral. And that's a big deal to me. We can confuse those two. We can allowing two, and let's clarify, age of consent. In anything I talk about with laws, the age of consent is always relevant. We're going to just assume we're talking about grown-ups. We're not talking about pedophiles. We're not talking about anything with minors. We're talking about grown-ups, right?
Right.
If 2 grown men want to get married in a church, that wouldn't be biblical. But in our society, I would say we need to allow that, not because I'm endorsing it, but because if I'm out protesting something that just aligns with my faith, even though I am not their enemy, I would be perceived, I think, as their enemy.
Right.
Because though that couple is unlikely to be a professing group of Christians, if they were, we would have doctrinal concerns, right?
Right.
And this is not to say that I think someone who's homosexual should be locked up, any type of penalty for that. Not at all. Not in any way. So that doesn't get misconstrued. But when we fight against the law that would just allow them to make, again, it's a couple that's decided to be together. They have assets that are shared. If one passes away, to make the ease of transferring those assets, let that be. Now, we could argue that there are other ways to do that, right? Sure. But as a Christian, when we fight that, I don't think we're standing up for what's right. Does that make, again, plenty of people will disagree with that because they will say, Bryan, it's not right. Well, sure. But I'm then coercing them to live in a way, because if they break that law, who comes to fix it? Are we sending the cops with guns to the couple's house to say you can't be married, or to the justice of the peace to say you can't issue them a license if it's legal, or any of those things? Well, I think we end up harming our cause more than helping. Again, I'm not saying that a guy should marry his buddy and his 3 best friends. If they want to and they're adults, well, having a harem sounds like a great thing when we're a 17-year-old boy, but I struggled to be a good husband to one wife.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, let them take on their troubles, but we've then become adversaries where I don't think we need to be. Right. In a political discussion, we're going to just be seen as an adversary, but that applies to so many things.
Yeah. So my take on same-sex marriage, right, as soon as the Supreme Court, first of all, I don't believe the Supreme Court has the right to make laws.
Correct. They give opinions.
Right.
We call them rulings, but it's really, I think, technically an opinion.
Yeah. And, that's unconstitutional, right? That
Yes.
should be up to Congress. Luckily, they did change Roe v. Wade, and now that's up to the states. And,
Right.
We ought to push for our states to be on the side of life. It's my take. When it comes to same-sex marriage, as soon as they made that ruling, I remember I was in Tennessee preaching at a camp, and I announced it there at the camp. And most people, those kids, and even most of the adults had no idea what I was talking about. But with that, at that moment, I made a clear decision. I had to start thinking that through. Right. No, I strongly disagree with same-sex marriage. However, now, and it's not codified in law, unless Congress may have done that later. But my thought was, if the state can say that this is okay, then why do we have the state involved in it at all? Right. Wouldn't it be better? Because over the course of time, the government always, and I mean always, gets it wrong.
Right.
So what if the government wasn't involved in what we call marriage? And that was something that was done exclusively through the church. Most people, and it's kind of funny, right? Because they push so hard for gay marriage, and yet marriage in general in America is on the huge decline. And we're waiting until we're in our 40s to get married, and now we don't know what we're going to do with how we're going to have kids.
Right.
We've got to have in vitro fertilization in order to have kids, and a whole bunch of other issues are going on. And that's when they're pushing for the gay marriage. In my estimation, if the government just wasn't involved in it to begin with, this would have never been an issue.
Agreed. And I think that's the opportunity for us as Christians, is to begin to rethink the amount of government involvement in things that aren't, we call property crimes, right? The reason to come together to form a government, by and large, is to protect our property.
Right.
No, I'm not talking about the gold bullion that I don't have stored in my safe, and I'm just worried about my wealth.
But that probably fell in the water with the boat accident.
Yes, with the cool arsenal.
Yeah.
But our home, ourselves, we are our own property, right? Yes, I belong to the Lord, but in a communal sense, I belong to myself, right?
Right.
I'm really a steward of even my children. I have some legal obligations, but I can't harm my kid just because they're a minor. I can't, they're not my property in that sense, but sort of responsible, right? But to protect our property, to make sure someone doesn't come and burn down my house or take away my family. That's the reason to come together, to create any type of governance. But beyond that, we're adding to it things that should be left out of the state control, right? If couples want to have we would say then a civil union, right? Marriage in the church, but they want to call it a marriage, and they get together. And then even people who get married in church can do the same legally, right? If the state is out of it, because the question will be from some listening, well, then if the state backs out, Bryan, all those benefits of, getting to be in the hospital room with your bride, or her with you if you're in an accident, or if you, one predeceases, I think that's the word, predeceases the other, the assets transfer, all that can be done legally. The marriage within the government just sort of checks that box, but we could do all those things without the government, right?
Right.
Whether it's a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple, all the legal things could be put into place. I think one of the challenges, and that's why we call it Just a Thinker, is I don't think we do that enough. You mentioned just some of the things we do or don't talk about within a congregation. We need to have more opportunity for discussion, right?
Absolutely.
Because I think that we're putting on the state things that shouldn't go there. Like you said, they always get it wrong. Once the same laws that were used to keep, by and large, black men from marrying white women Now it's doing things those people then didn't intend. The law of unintended consequence, it's always going to go sideways. So there are many things, whether it's marriage, even abortion, there are aspects of abortion that I don't think I've ever heard talked about in a congregation. So I've learned this the last few years. It's not, you'll have a pro-life people not call this an abortion, but if a woman has an ectopic pregnancy, ECTOPIC, ectopic, I believe is how it means that the egg has been fertilized in the fallopian tube. Mm-hmm. It's not coming out. She will die. The baby will die. Two people would be sentenced to death if we didn't allow for whichever medication would terminate the pregnancy, right? That's never talked about. Now, in Texas and other states, when abortions are outlawed, that one is still allowed. Okay. Right. Because the pro-life folks would buy, and I'm pro-life, but very adamant people say no abortion anytime. They'll call that not an abortion. I think it is. It's medically necessary, right? Right. So it's not one done for convenience, because it would be immoral as a Christian to advocate for a law that sentenced 2 innocent people to death, right? I guess a woman could decide not to take the medicine. I would want my wife to, not that I want to kill my unborn child, but I wouldn't want her to die if we could prevent it, right? So there are aspects of it that we don't talk about. There are aspects of any of the prohibition laws that, again, I think it's great that the Supreme Court finally gave the proper opinion that these things belong to the state. When we make it illegal, one thing we haven't done is we haven't necessarily changed demand. Demand will go down a little. Texas has, for a number of years, worked very diligently. I say Texas, Texans who are believers who have put immense political pressure on elected officials, even though the elected officials will tell you, this is my heart to save the babies. I don't believe them because I'm cynical, maybe a thinker. I think they do it. Sure, do some of them start out with us? Perhaps. But the various political organizations like Texas Alliance for Life and others put immense pressure on the politicians to make it very difficult to get an abortion. That has brought not only percentages, but actual abortions down in Texas, right? It keeps decreasing. And that's good. So we can minimize some demand, but it doesn't change all of the demand, right? So there's that, meaning the demand is there are going to be women who get pregnant unintentionally. They weren't planning it. I mean, they knew that the act would potentially lead to a baby, but that wasn't their intention. There are probably ways as we move in with new technology, not yet there, but close, like artificial wombs. Mm-hmm. You see it for animals who are close to this technology. As a Christian, yes, I want fewer abortions, but I also want a scientist to create something that would make it easier to tell that lady, hey, you don't have to have an abortion. We now have a procedure that would allow you to remove that fertilized egg without damage to your future ability to conceive. That's the right word. The ability to conceive and carry a child to term, because sometimes my understanding is an abortion can do this. Right? An abortion could impact a woman's ability to conceive in the future and carry a baby to term. They may not know that. But if we had the technology that would make it even easier, so that, sure, we can have these things outlawed, but can we also give that woman an incentive who does find herself in that place to not necessarily just drive to another state or to buy the over-the-counter abortion pill? Because I think as a Christian, I have to be careful to think, I checked the box because it's illegal. Now I've done my job.
Yeah.
Right. Am I contributing to the Crisis Pregnancy Center? Am I encouraging that scientist who could create such a thing? Because not only would it benefit animals, it would benefit people. There would be mass application. I think people are working on these things, but it's something that we don't talk about much and don't think about much.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? Because we get to thinking that if we just pass the law, right, then that's going to fix everything. Or the constitutional amendment, right? As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned and, our leaders in Texas said, hey, we're just reverting back to the law originally. Right. And so, which, I don't have a problem with. However, it doesn't eliminate the need for the unplanned pregnancy and that mother. I am glad to see, and that's really where the church should be coming in.
Yes.
Right. In my estimation, the state shouldn't be coming in. Right. What I mean by that is the state has no business saying, "Hey, we'll support you, we'll feed you."
Right.
Cradle to grave is.
It doesn't actually help. Yeah,
right. Where if we've got a church and that's the church's role, and the church recognizes that, and that's another issue that we've got, is it's not just that the state has gone sideways, the church has forgotten its role.
Correct.
Right? We think that if we go to church on Sunday and, maybe we pay our tithes. I pastor a church, and that's why I say maybe.
Right.
Maybe I pay my tithes, and maybe I only go once a week. If you're lucky, most don't do that, right? But if I do that, then I'm playing my role. I'm doing my part. Where when you go back and you look at the writings and the stuff that Jesus said and what is actually in the Word, it is so much more than a Sunday only Christian. We got a lot of people that are just nigh of the CEO. And what I mean by that is Christian and Easter only.
Yes.
Right. That's when they're going to go to church. And we've got so many that are just shy of that. Well, I go, but you're not really involved in impacting your community.
Yes. The Christmas and Easter only, I think, is a great acronym. And there are a lot of those. And many of us probably are that way, even if we go more frequently.
Right.
I think it's very easy to be a very good hearer of the word, but not always a good doer of the word. I fall short in the doing side. Conversations are part of that, but there's doing. And I think we need to do much more of both so that we know, and there are, in Texas, there's like 350 crisis pregnancy centers. Now, before the law with Roe v. Wade, the opinion handed down by the Supreme Court, there were only a handful of abortion clinics in Texas. There weren't very many.
Right.
There are many. I think it is somewhere around 350 or more crisis pregnancy centers. So they're out there. We all need to do a better job of being aware of them. And you were absolutely correct. The church, that's us, right?
Right.
We've got to be better engaged with that. And I also know that there is the challenge, the struggle internally that if a young girl gets pregnant, what do you do? If it's your daughter, my daughter, or a member of the congregation, right? Because there is a fear, I think a natural one, that we know we need to love her, but then there's the fear that becomes like MTV's show, right? They have pregnant 10-year-olds or whatever they're doing, right? Some show that where you're promoting it, right? That young girl, if she gets pregnant when she's 15 and we embrace her, are we then encouraging other 15-year-olds to get pregnant? That's at least something I have struggled with, right?
Right.
I've watched it growing up. It happened, in my youth group. It's happened within our current congregation. It happens in probably every congregation of any size. You get more than a handful of teenagers, it's probably going to happen. And then I struggle with that. Like, what do we do? Right? You don't want to shun it. And certainly don't shun the kids. It's not the kid's fault. But that struggle is real, right? Like, if we embrace that young lady, are we then encouraging more? So I don't know. There's not an easy answer to that. Jesus probably just loved them, right? The Lord would. He would overcome my issues and just love them. And we were talking before we start recording, we would teach that's the reason that the Bible wants us to be married before we're having babies. Try to teach that to our kids. Not because somehow Jesus doesn't want us to have pleasure. It's not that.
Right.
And it's not that believers are prude and don't understand physical intimacy. No, it is entirely that there's an order of things that works better.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
If I get married, then, in modern times, if I have a job, I've graduated from school, I have a job, then I get married, then I have children, I think there's like a 95% chance I will not be in poverty. The kids will be well educated and generally healthy, and we'll avoid the criminal behavior, right? So just a few steps, we know it's better for us. That's the real reason. And because I've seen people get pregnant out of wedlock, and people that I respect, that I care for, it throws their life out in just into disarray, right? Because if the marriage doesn't work out, then you have new parents not living in the same place. You have a baby that's shuttled back and forth.
Right.
Do those kids grow up okay? Some of them do, if the father's involved, but it's not the way it was meant to be, right?
Absolutely.
So, the embracing of the young person, but those are challenges. So it's the same thing with the legal, illegal, right? If abortion is illegal, we have to be careful not to say, okay, I've done my job, right? The box is checked. You're right. We were crisis pregnancy centers. We need to, again, I think about technology that would then make it easier for a woman who really is like, I don't want to carry this baby to term, right? There's no way I'm carrying it to term. I'm going to that other state, or I'm going to go buy that pill that's going to terminate the pregnancy. It would be awesome if there was a number of scientists, whether they're believers or not, that they create the technology that we have an artificial womb, and we can remove that baby from without harming you. And if you tell the woman that and say, look, we won't harm you. We'll cover your medical care. And if that's where the church jumps in. So look, if you're going to be off for 2 weeks or whatever, I'm making the 2 weeks up. Of course, we're going to pay. I know you're well employed. You're a lawyer. You make $400,000. We're going to pay. We're going to cover that.
Yeah. That's an awesome idea. So going back to talking about, you've got a teenage pregnancy. So we had that in our congregation as well. And we had a young lady who was pregnant outside of wedlock. I want to say she was about 14 years old. And her grandfather, so her mom was on drugs. Her dad's nowhere around. Her mom's not only on drugs, but then she's staying with somebody who eventually was arrested and sentenced to 99 plus years.
It's a really bad situation.
Yeah. He was running a child prostitution type ring, right? So this young lady grew up in that kind of atmosphere, but she was coming to the church, and she met another boy in the congregation, and they ended up hooking up. She got pregnant, and Grandpa decided, well, you can't stay here anymore. He refused to go to court. She was already in CPS's care. So CPS said, well, if Grandpa doesn't show up, he's the one that's the overseer. So we're going to have to put you in a foster care. And they were about to ship her off. And then I got a call from Missy and we got a call from the future dad, or I guess the dad's mom. And she said, hey, listen, they're going to ship her off, but they're shipping her like 2 hours away. And would you be willing to let her come and stay with you? And so we did. Oh, cool. And she moved in, and eventually she had the baby. And, at this point, I don't want to go through all the sad things, because there are a bunch of sad things that happen with that kind of situation. But that baby is now about 10 years old or so, and just a great kid. Good. But the dad has the baby at this point, right? The 10-year-old, or he's roughly about 10. Dad has the son, and dad's influence in that son, right? We're kind of grabbing a couple of different dad's influence. Now that dad's not perfect, right? Obviously that dad's not perfect. And he's done some really dumb things, but what that boy needed was a dad in his life, right. And so I've got great anticipation for what can happen, and the fact that boy, that now young man, is still alive. That's great. And isn't that what the church is supposed to be?
Yes, for? And I've got to get better so I can quote the research, but I read a study that compared good fathering, bad fathering, no father. The children, obviously, good fathered. We know that was going to produce the best results.
Right.
But a crappy father is better than no father. So my kids check that box. So we strive for good. We get crappy, but it's better than no dad. And so for that child who's now becoming a young man, even though his father's imperfect, like all of us, and probably more highly flawed than many, still that's going to be better for that child. And yes, that's what the church should do. And those are difficult things, right? Because clearly, and that's my guess is that the congregation is probably aware of some of the challenges, right? So it's not glorified. And I know that we probably default to that question I always have in my head is, are we going to glorify it? And by and large, most of us, I realize now the older I get, because I'm slow to mature, intellectually, spiritually, slower than I should be, is that, yes, when we step into care, that is what we should be doing, right? We're not glorifying it, but we're stepping into care. And that is being the church, right?
Yes.
I mean, I've not been to Bible college. And we talked again before we started recording that I'd read the scriptures many times. I've done the Bible in a year since I was about 13, not an expert, even though there are days I think I am. I pretend I'm a theologian. Jesus touched a lot of people who didn't become believers. Right, he cared for many people who went away when the free food went away. Right,
yeah, right.
But he still cared for them. And that's what we plant seeds. He's responsible for the harvest. Sometimes I think we want to be responsible for the harvest. Right. Maybe I won't say. I know I do. There are times I think I'm going to. I'm responsible for it all. I'm not. I'm responsible to be a good example. I'm responsible to step in. Not responsible for the outcome.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that fear of being responsible for the outcome, it certainly has kept me from acting. And that probably is others, if I'm not being facetious.
The vast majority of Christians that want to do something, I'm convinced, it's the fear of rejection, the fear of failure that stops us from doing. And what could we do if we got beyond that fear?
Well, I hope that, for many of the folks that listen, my mom who's listening, and maybe someday there, other people listen through when it goes into your podcast, and I know other Christians think about these things, right? Don't want to be facetious and think it's just you and me. We're the only ones, and the Lord says there's 10,000 or there's 10 million, but that we have more of these dialogues and not just hearing and talking about. These are important things, but more doing it, because the doing, I bet that it felt good to help them. And I don't mean that again, not because you're like, oh, here's a peasant, I'm helping the peasant.
Right.
But here's someone in need.
Yeah,
right. They could have been very well off and you still step in. It's not that, but helping, we benefit more from the giving.
Oh,
we
absolutely.
Do. Like it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we've probably run out of time for now.
Yes, well, thank you. And it's probably the best almost 40 minutes that I've recorded. The first 4 episodes will be pretty rough. We'll make this one. I don't know. We might put this one out first on my end. So we give them the good wine first, and then when they're well drunk, we give them the bad episodes. I'm not sure if it'll work that way. I should have started off as a drinking game. And then when they hear my other episodes, it'll go better. I don't know. So there's no drinking game yet, folks. So you just that part's a joke. No drinking game. But Brahm, thank you. So you can get his podcast, which you probably already subscribed to, but it's the Brahm Show. It used to be called Of God and Men, but that's now the network, right? So now you've other friends of yours, people you respect, and then you just out of the goodness of your heart, you're like, where's the orphan we're trying to help? I remember my friend Brian, and so because the other folks in the Of God and Men network, most of them are licensed ministers.
Yeah, good number of them.
And you've got a PhD in there.
Right. Almost had 2. One of them got away.
All right. The I would say physician, but it's physics, right?
Yeah. Well, the one we almost had was physics, and the other is education.
Okay. So you've got, we'll get the one that got away, but you've got some educated folks in there, and then some people who are pretending to be educated like me. So you can subscribe to the Brahm Show, and then the Just a Thinker Show, the Just a Thinker podcast.
And you see it. You can get it all on OGM.network.
OGM.network.